Africa, where the human race began. Nearly 1 billion people live here. And it's a continent with an incredible diversity of communities and cultures. Yet we know less of its history than almost anywhere else on Earth. But that's beginning to change. In the last few decades, researchers and archaeologists have begun to uncover a range of histories as impressive and extraordinary as anywhere else on Earth. It's a history which has been neglected for years, and it's largely without written records. But it is preserved for us in the gold and statues, in the culture, art, and legends of the people. My name is Gus Casely Hayford. Over many years, I've studied the history and culture of Africa. As an art historian, I'm used to drawing stories from mute objects from the past. I'm going to discover the history and find out what really happened to the lost kingdoms of Africa. My next destination was once the busiest and most important city in Africa, Aksum. The interesting thing is that Aksum was a huge, thriving city. And I'm just reading this book, which is about Aksum at its height, about it being a huge ivory market and people coming from all about to trade with this enormous empire. The book is the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a first-century travel guide which describes Aksum as a thriving, bustling city. In fact, other documents of the time ranked Aksum alongside Rome, Persia, and China as one of the 4 great world powers. Given its significance, I think it's remarkable we know so little about its history. After all, Aksum has a considerable claim to fame. This, according to Ethiopians and their Orthodox Church, is where the son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon actually brought the Ark of the Covenant 3,000 years ago. Ethiopian Christians believe that beyond these walls is one of the foundations of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Ark containing the 10 Commandments. Until 1974, that Ark was the cornerstone of the legitimacy of the kingdom itself. The existence of the Ark here would go a long way to prove that the Ethiopian dynasty of emperors was founded by King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It would confirm the legends that have lasted for centuries. But the Ark is deemed so holy that no one is allowed anywhere near it. I can't go beyond this point here, because in that chapel there is where the Ark of the Covenant is said to be held. Security is tight, and it must be kept that way to maintain the faith in the foundations of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and by extension the legitimacy of centuries of kings. If the Ark is not inside this building, then the foundations of the church and the Ethiopian royal line would be destroyed. But the Ark is not the only potential evidence of this kingdom's ancient heritage. My search for Ethiopia's past continues, right next to the Ark's purpose-built resting place. And now that building may be very new, but come and have a look over here. Down here is something very, very old. This is the remains of a building which is 4th century, said to have been built by King Ezana. Ezana, archaeologists believe, was responsible for Ethiopia's first Christian church. He was the first Ethiopian emperor to convert to Christianity. Archaeologists know this for certain because coins minted during his rule show almost the moment of Ezana's conversion. One coin has a Christian cross in its design, but another, earlier coin, shows the pre-Christian religious symbol of the crescent moon and the sun. This is hugely significant. It means that there was a continuity of ruler before and after Ethiopia became a Christian country. The Judeo-Christian tradition here does seem to be unbroken. The coins confirm another fact. By the 4th century, this was a significant, well-established kingdom. This was the only place in sub-Saharan Africa at that time known to have issued currency. The coins aren't the only objects in Aksum that show the power this place had at the beginning of the Christian era. These are the grave markers or stelae of the emperors at Aksum. They were made from solid granite and some date back to the 1st and 2nd centuries. They are thought to be the largest pieces of stone ever to come out of a quarry in the ancient world. The tallest stood at over 30 meters and weighed around 500 tons. I think they're as impressive as any monument I've seen in Athens or Rome. My guide here, Yagalam Fisheha, is showing me their amazing carvings, which are still beautifully clear almost 2,000 years after they were made. They depict the great buildings it was believed the emperors would inhabit in the afterlife. Skyscrapers to immortality.
This architecture was the architecture of the Aksumite people. It's an architecture of a building.
Yes.
Multi-story house.
I see.
Multi-story house.
And then these are the...
wooden beams. They represent, the end of the wooden beams. When the Aksumites were practicing this architecture, first they started with wood. So we have the windows. So we have the wooden beams. Then we have another. So this in general is multi-story house building.
I've seen this before. This is the architecture used at Debre Damo around 500 years later. And over 1,000 years later, it appears to have inspired the stonework of the churches of Lalibela. At the top is a symbol of the rising sun once more. I've had just a very quiet epiphany moment when this journey has begun to really make sense. I mean, this stela, this single piece of rock, holds many of the elements that I've seen on my journey up until now, but here configured in a way that gives them a kind of sense, gives them a continuous historical narrative, which I suppose is the history of Ethiopia. The features on these stelae, marking the ancient burial places of Ethiopian emperors 2,000 years ago, have been consciously echoed down the years by the emperors that followed them. What I'm seeing at Aksum are continuous traditions taking the story of the Ethiopian kingdom back to the beginning of Christianity. But I still want to find evidence that the kingdom might go back even further, to the days of Solomon and Sheba. Yagalam has one more ancient artifact to show me. Wow, what's this?
Here we have a memorial stone inscription, which was written in the beginning of the 4th century by King Ezana,
Wow.
the first Christian king of Aksumite kingdom.
So what's inscribed on it?
The message of the inscription is more about his military victories and more about his political power.
It's a proclamation, a kind of tourist information sign, telling visitors to Aksum about the might of the emperor. And it's multilingual, the inscriptions in the local Ge'ez language, still used in church traditions. It's in the international language of the day, ancient Greek, and it's in a language called Sabaean. Sabaean was spoken only for a brief time, and only in this part of Africa and southern Arabia. Historians think it died out around the 8th century, but it first appeared around 1000 BC. It's the language of Saba, the part of Yemen where the Queen of Sheba is said to have come from. This stone is from the 4th century AD, 1400 years after the Queen of Sheba is supposed to have reigned. It's not the Ark of the Covenant, but it does point me deeper into the past in my search for the kingdom's origins. Ethiopia's emperors may have died out, but the kingdom in many senses still survives. And the language, in the people, in the history, in the traditions. It's an extraordinary history, a proud history, one that deserves to be better known.